Before we begin today's incredible story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell, so you never miss another heartwarming story inspired by real-life values. Imagine a billionaire laughing at a young waitress and saying, "Serve me in English and I'll pay you $1,000. He thought she was just another ordinary server. But within moments, she spoke 5 different languages, leaving an entire ballroom speechless and teaching everyone a lesson they'll never forget about respect, humility, and judging people by appearances. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get started. Emily Carter adjusted the white cuffs of her uniform as she stepped onto the polished marble floor of the Grand Wellington Hotel, one of Manhattan's most prestigious luxury hotels. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the magnificent ballroom, reflecting thousands of tiny lights across polished silverware and elegant glass tables. Outside, black luxury sedans lined the entrance while photographers captured the arrival of celebrities, politicians, philanthropists, and business leaders attending the city's biggest annual charity gala. Inside, every employee moved with military precision. Managers quietly checked every detail, chefs worked tirelessly in the kitchen, and waiters glided through the ballroom carrying silver trays filled with gourmet appetizers and expensive champagne. Tonight wasn't just another event. It was the hotel's most important evening of the year. One mistake could cost someone their job. Emily inhaled deeply before joining the serving staff. Although she looked calm, she knew everyone around her had years of experience. This was only her second week working at the hotel. Few people knew that only 6 months earlier she had graduated with honors from one of Chicago's top universities with a degree in international relations and modern languages. She had dreamed of working for the U.S. State Department or an international humanitarian organization. She spoke multiple languages fluently after years of dedicated study, scholarships abroad, and countless nights practicing pronunciation with native speakers online. But dreams didn't always pay rent. Her father had passed away during her final year of college after a long illness. Medical bills had drained the family's savings, and Emily postponed every career opportunity to support her widowed mother and younger brother. After moving to New York hoping for better opportunities, she discovered that finding professional work without connections was far more difficult than earning excellent grades. Until the interviews came, serving tables was the only honest way to keep food on the table. Despite wearing a waitress uniform instead of business attire, Emily carried herself with quiet dignity. She greeted every guest with genuine kindness, remembered drink orders without writing them down, and treated everyone, from security guards to billionaires, with equal respect. Her supervisor often noticed how international guests naturally smiled whenever Emily spoke to them. She could effortlessly understand different accents, but she never mentioned why. She believed actions spoke louder than resumes. Across the ballroom, laughter suddenly erupted from a table near the stage. Richard Blackwell had arrived. Everyone in New York's business world knew the billionaire real estate developer. His fortune was estimated at several $billion, and his luxury towers dominated city skylines across America. Newspapers praised his business instincts, but hotel employees knew another side of him. Richard enjoyed testing people. He loved making employees uncomfortable just to entertain his wealthy friends. Some called it confidence. Others quietly called it arrogance. His table included hedge fund managers, luxury brand executives, and influential investors who laughed almost automatically whenever Richard made a sarcastic remark. As Emily approached carrying a tray of sparkling water and imported champagne, she noticed the group watching her. Richard glanced briefly at her name tag before leaning back in his chair with an amused smile. "Emily," he read aloud. "You look new?" "Yes, sir," she answered politely. "May I refill your glass?" Instead of handing over his empty glass, Richard looked around at his guests. "I have a little challenge." The conversation at nearby tables slowed as people sensed another one of Richard's public games. He smiled confidently. "Serve me in English, and I'll pay you $1,000. His friends burst into laughter. Several guests assumed he meant. Emily barely understood English because she looked quiet and didn't speak unless necessary. Emily simply smiled. Certainly, sir. Would you prefer sparkling or still water with your dinner? Her pronunciation was calm, clear, and unmistakably American. Richard raised an eyebrow. Well, your English is better than I expected. More laughter followed. But I'm guessing that's the only language you know. Emily didn't react. My responsibility is to make every guest feel welcome. Richard slowly removed a crisp $100 bill from his wallet and placed it on the white tablecloth. I'll make this interesting. $100 for every additional language you can actually speak. He paused dramatically as more guests turned their attention toward the exchange. But if you're pretending, he said with a grin, I'll personally tell hotel management you lied to a customer. The ballroom grew noticeably quieter. Even nearby waiters stopped moving. Emily looked at Richard for only a second before gently placing her serving tray onto a nearby stand. Without showing the slightest sign of nervousness, she turned toward a distinguished French ambassador seated at the neighboring table. Bonsoir, monsieur. J'espère que votre soirée se passe agréablement, she said with flawless French. The ambassador's eyes widened in surprise before he smiled warmly and replied in French. Emily answered him effortlessly. She then turned toward a Japanese technology. Executive, konbanwa. Oshikoto wa ikaga desu ka? The executive blinked in disbelief before responding in rapid Japanese. Emily replied just as naturally. Next, she greeted a Brazilian philanthropist in smooth Portuguese, welcomed a German entrepreneur in fluent German, and finally helped a Spanish investor and an American donor understand each other's discussion by translating between Spanish and English without hesitation. Every conversation flowed as though she had lived in each country for years. Forks stopped halfway to plates. The jazz band continued playing, but almost no one was listening anymore. The entire ballroom had fallen silent. Richard Blackwell's confident grin slowly disappeared. For the first time that evening, the billionaire realized he wasn't the smartest person in the room, and the waitress he had tried to humiliate had just proven it in front of everyone. The silence lingered for several long seconds. Richard Blackwell stared at Emily as though the confident young waitress standing before him had somehow become a stranger. Around the ballroom, conversations had completely stopped. Even the musicians on stage seemed distracted, watching to see what the billionaire would do next. One of Richard's business partners leaned forward and whispered, Richard, I think you owe her a lot more than $1,000. A ripple of laughter spread through the room, but this time it wasn't aimed at Emily. Richard forced a smile, trying to recover his composure. Well, he said, clapping slowly. That was impressive. Emily simply nodded. Thank you. Sir! Richard reached into his wallet and counted 10 crisp $100 bills before placing them neatly on the table, as promised. Emily looked at the money but made no attempt to pick it up. I appreciate your offer, she said calmly, but I didn't speak those languages for money. The guests exchanged surprised glances. Richard frowned. Then why did you do it? Emily answered without raising her voice. Because you assumed my value based on my uniform. The words landed harder than anyone expected. For the first time in years, Richard found himself speechless. Emily continued. Many people think someone serving food must be uneducated. They never ask about our stories. They only notice the apron. Several guests quietly lowered their eyes. A woman seated nearby slowly removed the smile from her face, clearly embarrassed for laughing only moments. Earlier, Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. You have a point, he admitted. Emily smiled politely. My father always taught me that respect should come before judgment. The billionaire looked at her more carefully now. So why are you working here? I graduated 6 months ago. From where? The University of Chicago. Several heads turned immediately. Richard's eyebrows lifted. What did you study? International relations. And the languages? I studied French, Spanish, German, Portuguese, Japanese, and Arabic. English is my first language. A hedge fund manager nearly dropped his wine glass. You speak all of those fluently? Emily nodded. I've also worked as a volunteer interpreter for refugee families and International medical teams. The room fell silent. Again. Richard suddenly realized that the young woman carrying dinner plates possessed qualifications that many executives at his own company didn't have. "What are you doing serving tables?" he asked quietly. Emily answered honestly. "My father passed away last year after a long illness. Medical bills consumed everything my family had. My mother needed help, and my younger brother was still in school." She paused for a moment before continuing. "I applied for dozens of professional positions. Most required experience or personal connections I didn't have. Bills couldn't wait for opportunities. No." One laughed now. Several guests looked visibly emotional. An elderly woman at another table discreetly wiped tears from her eyes. Richard slowly leaned back in his chair, absorbing every word. For years he had believed success belonged only to the strongest and smartest people. Tonight he was forced to confront a truth he had ignored for decades. Talent doesn't always wear expensive suits. Sometimes it carries a serving tray. One of the charity board members stood and approached Emily. "Young lady," he said warmly, "our organization works with diplomats from around the world. We struggle every year to find qualified interpreters." Emily smiled. "That's wonderful." He handed her his business card. "I think we should schedule an interview." Before she could respond, another guest stood. He was the regional director of a multinational technology company. "We're opening a global communications office in Washington," he said. "People with your language skills are extremely rare." He handed Emily another business card. Then a third guest walked over. She introduced herself as the vice president of an international humanitarian foundation. "We've been searching for someone exactly like you." Within minutes, Emily's apron pocket held more professional business cards than job applications she had submitted. During the previous 6 months, Richard watched the scene unfold with growing disbelief. Only 20 minutes earlier, everyone had seen Emily as just a waitress. Now some of the country's most influential leaders were competing to recruit her. The billionaire glanced at the untouched stack of $100 bills still lying on the table. For the first time in a very long time, he understood that money could buy attention, but it could never measure someone's true worth. The ballroom gradually came back to life, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Conversations that had once revolved around stock prices, luxury vacations, and business mergers now centered on Emily Carter. Guests who had barely noticed her an hour earlier now greeted her with genuine respect whenever she passed their tables. Emily quietly returned to work. She continued serving drinks, clearing plates and smiling politely, refusing to let the unexpected attention distract her. To her, every guest deserved the same level of professionalism, whether they were a billionaire or a hotel employee working a double shift. Richard Blackwell, however, couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. For the first time in years, he saw himself through the eyes of everyone around him. The joke he had intended to make at someone else's expense had exposed his own arrogance instead. He had spent decades believing that expensive suits, private jets, and bank accounts revealed a person's value. Emily had shattered that belief in less than 5 minutes. As the charity dinner came to an end, Richard quietly walked toward the hotel manager. "I need a favor," he said. The manager looked nervous. "Of course, Mr. Blackwell. I'd like to speak with Emily privately, only if she's comfortable." A few minutes later, Emily entered a quiet lounge overlooking Central Park. The noise of the ballroom faded behind the closed doors. Richard stood as she entered. There was no audience now. No cameras, no wealthy friends, just two people having an honest conversation. "I owe you an apology," Richard began. Emily remained silent, allowing him to continue. "I've embarrassed employees for years because I thought it was harmless entertainment. Tonight you showed me something I should have learned a long time ago." He looked down briefly. "I judged you before I knew anything about you," Emily answered softly. "You're not the first person to do that. I hope I'll be one of the last." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Richard reached into his briefcase and removed a folder. "I own an international development company. We negotiate projects in more than 30 countries. We spend millions each year hiring consultants who speak multiple languages. Emily listened carefully. I don't want to offer you charity, Richard continued. I want to offer you an opportunity. He slid the folder across the table. Inside was an employment contract for the position of International Communications Director. The salary was more than 6 times what Emily had hoped to earn at her first professional job. It included health insurance, relocation assistance for her mother, college tuition support for her younger brother, paid international travel, and leadership training. Emily looked up in surprise. Mr. Blackwell, this is far more than I expected. He smiled. It isn't a gift. She looked at him curiously. It's an investment in someone who earned it. Emily closed the folder gently. I appreciate your confidence, but before I answer, I'd like to ask one question. Richard nodded. If I accept, will your company judge employees by their titles or by their abilities? Richard didn't hesitate. After tonight, that culture changes. The following Monday, Richard gathered more than 300 executives and department heads at his corporate headquarters. Instead of beginning with quarterly profits, he told them the story of a waitress who had taught one of America's richest businessmen the most valuable lesson of his life. He announced a company-wide initiative eliminating unnecessary hiring barriers, expanding internship opportunities, creating mentorship programs for applicants without professional connections, and requiring every executive, including himself, to spend 1 day each year working alongside frontline employees. Many executives were shocked. Some resisted the changes. Richard remained firm. We'll never overlook talent because of a uniform again. 6 months later, Emily had become one of the company's most respected leaders. Her language skills helped secure international partnerships worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But her greatest contribution wasn't translation. She reminded every new employee that respect costs nothing, yet its value is priceless. Back at the Grand Wellington Hotel, the story of the young waitress spread from one employee to another. New staff members often heard about the night a billionaire tried to embarrass a server and left with a lesson money could never buy, because appearances can hide extraordinary potential. A uniform doesn't define intelligence. A paycheck doesn't measure dignity. And the greatest language anyone can learn isn't French, Japanese, Spanish, or German. It's the language of respect.